The following program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.
Good afternoon. My name is Max Weinberg, and I'm a political science major at New England College. Today, on behalf of the Center for Civic Engagement, it is my pleasure to introduce our presidential candidate, United States Senator from Colorado, Michael Bennett. Michael Bennett has represented Colorado in the United States Senate since 2009. Widely recognized as a pragmatic and independent thinker, he is driven by a deep-seated obligation to create more opportunity for the next generation. Michael has built a reputation for taking on Washington dysfunction and working with both Republicans and Democrats to address our nation's challenges, including education, climate change, immigration, healthcare, and national security. Today, Senator Bennett seeks our support for president. Please join me in welcoming Senator Michael Bennett to New England College.
Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for coming.
Thanks for that introduction. Well, it's great to be here. It's great to be at New England College. It's wonderful. I saw the snow on the slopes on the way in. I thought immediately of home, where we're just getting our ski season underway. So it was wonderful to see that. And I will be brief at the outset because I'd like to spend the time in a conversation. Can you guys hear me without the machine? Yeah. Is it all right? Is that all right with you?
Yeah, it's totally fine by me.
Why don't you leave it right there? Maybe others will want. Say a few words at the outset, and then what I really would like to do is spend a conversation with all of you about what you'd like to talk about. I thought yesterday was an important day in our democracy. It was a moment where we began to see our democracy push back against the lawlessness of the Trump administration, and for me it was particularly personally compelling because I was born in New Delhi, India, which I don't ordinarily say. It's not on prominently displayed on my website, but it's true, in 1964. And I was born there because my parents had gone out there during the Kennedy administration to work for our embassy in New Delhi, to try to bring democratic values and an approach to the world at a time when we were having the Cold War. And to see that ambassador yesterday stand up for the American Foreign Service, to stand up for patriots who are serving this country all over the world, was, I think, really important for us to see again after years of the president and the Freedom Caucus and other folks doing nothing but denigrating people who are serving this republic. And to see it happen at the same time as the president was interfering with the testimony from the Oval Office is something I never believed I would see. But I was glad to see that. And when I was in the second grade, my class was asked to line up in order of whose family was here the longest and whose family was here the shortest period of time. And I turned out to be the answer to both those questions. On my dad's side, my family was here all the way back to the Mayflower, although the people that came over that were related to me perished in the first winter. There was a kid, though, that had been born in England who came like 20 years later. That's how we can claim that ancestry. And I never knew that, by the way, until I was running for president. Somebody said it to me. But on my mom's side, my mom's family were Polish Jews who had survived the Holocaust and had very recently come to the United States. They hadn't left because my grandfather didn't want to leave his extended family behind. And in the end, everybody was killed except for my mom, her parents, and an aunt. They lived in Warsaw for 2 years, and then they went to Stockholm for a year after that. Then they went to all places, Mexico City for a year, and they lived there. And then they came to the one place in the world where they thought they could rebuild their shattered lives, and that was the United States of America. I have traveled broadly in our country and in my state where there are lots of immigrants. And I've yet to meet a single person in America that's got a thicker accent than my grandparents had. And I have never met anybody more patriotic than my grandparents were, because they loved this country for what it gave to them and what it made possible for them. On my dad's side, he was a public servant the whole time I was growing up. He was working either on Capitol Hill or in the State Department, and from him we learned that public service is noble, which is why I was so grateful to see the example that was set yesterday, and the example I hope that will be set in the coming days as we try to restrain a president who is lawless, which President Trump has been, a president who doesn't believe in freedom of the press, who doesn't believe in the separation of powers, who doesn't believe.
Speak up, please.
Who does? Here, I can speak. Sure, I'd be glad to. Can you hear me now? Who doesn't believe in freedom of the press, who doesn't believe, I don't think, in our democracy. And I believe in our democracy, but I think that it's at real risk. I think it's at risk not because Donald Trump's president. I think he's a symptom of the challenges that we confront rather than the essential cause. He's made matters much worse, but the reality is, before he got there, our democracy was getting torn at the seams, in part because we've had 50 years of no economic mobility for 90% of the American people. And if I had to sum up the last 10 years of town halls that I've had in Colorado, which is a state that's exactly a third Democratic, a third Republican, and a third independent, it is a purple state. People come there and say to me, Michael, no matter how hard we work, we can't afford some combination of housing, healthcare, higher education, or early childhood education. In other words, we can't afford a middle-class life. And for families that don't come to my town halls, but I know well from having been superintendent of the Denver Public Schools, 95,000 kids school district where most of the kids live in poverty and most of the kids are kids of color. If they did come to my town halls, what they would say is no matter how hard we work, and we are killing ourselves, working 2 and 3 jobs, we can't get our kids out of poverty. And that kind of lack of mobility that's added up to the worst income inequality that we've had in more than 100 years is a danger to our democracy. And when we denigrate the institutions that we have, as Donald Trump and the Freedom Caucus have, or as Mitch McConnell is doing when he's turning our exercise in self-government into rubble before our eyes, that creates even more risk as well. And I ask people sometimes, why did you vote for Donald Trump at home? And it's important to remember, 9 million people voted twice for Barack Obama and once for Donald Trump. And at home, often what they say is, we voted for him because we wanted to blow the place up. And I say, congratulations, you achieved your objective. But now what are we going to do for our kids and our grandkids? What are we going to do for America's place in the world? Just last weekend, when Donald Trump was tweeting out all the craziness that he was tweeting out, and that any American who did it, from any walk of life who was employed would have been met Monday morning by the HR department in their company saying, if you keep tweeting this stuff out, we're going to have to let you go. And if the person had responded, don't worry about that. I am a stable genius. Don't worry about that. I have unmatched wisdom. That person would be gone. But because that person happens to be president of the United States, over the course of that weekend, the Iranians doubled the number of centrifuges they're using to enrich uranium. And the Chinese signed a trade agreement with enough other countries that it represents half the GDP of the world. And the United States of America is completely absent. This is the cost of having this guy as our president. And week after week after week that we've frittered away with topics like, how are we going to pay for a wall that even the Republicans didn't want to support, and then the Mexicans were never going to pay for, while China is building 3,500 miles of fiber optic cable to connect Latin America with Africa and then back to China, exemplifies just how non-trivial this all is. And that's why he needs to be a one-term president. We should never have lost to him the last time. We were careless with our democracy, and it resulted in somebody who is completely unqualified to be president being elected president. And I'm the only person in this race that's actually won 2 national races in a purple state. Nobody else has done that. And in order to beat Donald Trump and send Mitch McConnell back to Kentucky, we're going to have to win purple states all over this country. And it can't be an afterthought. When you run for office in a place like Colorado, you know that you've got to say the same thing in the primary that you say in the general election. You can't hope that people don't notice what you're going to say or that somehow you can make it better in the general election. How you start the campaign at the beginning is what people are going to be looking for on election day. And I think that's what we're going to face. And we've got to nominate somebody in this election who can not just unify the Democratic base, that's important, but also bring back some of those 9 million people who voted twice for Barack Obama and once for Donald Trump. And I think I'm offering an agenda that will allow us to do that and to unify the country. I want to say one last thing, and then I'll stop and take whatever questions you have. And this is particularly addressed to the young people that are here, the students that are here, but it's for everybody here. If you remember nothing else from our conversation today, nothing else, I hope you will remember this. And that is that every single one of us has to make sure that every eligible voter in this country has the chance to vote on election day. And we need to make sure they do vote. And if they're not registered to vote, that we register them to vote. If we do that, we're not leaving this to chance. You know, we will make Donald Trump a one-term president, and we will begin to overcome the special interests in Washington, D.C., and the money that Citizens United has flooded into our political system. There is no shortcut to doing that. Just like there's not a shortcut to winning in purple states. Changing the rules is a shortcut. Winning is the hard work, and that's what we really have to do. And it's hard, but it's no harder than what Americans have done for generations going back to the founding of this country. And that's why I'm confident that if we nominate the right person, we're going to be able to do it. And I really believe we can. And there's so much work for us to do when you've got an economy that's delivering only for the top 10%, and 90% of Americans can't afford a middle-class slave. Whereas a former school superintendent, I'll tell you, when you got an education system that's reinforcing the income inequality we have, rather than liberating people from it, we have a lot more work to do. When you've got a climate denier in the White House, so you can't even have a discussion about how to address climate change in this country, not just urgently, but in a way that will last for a generation, which is what we have to do. There's work for us to do. And when you've got a politics that's dominated, as it is today, by the richest people in America, and it's leaving the rest of America behind, we have a lot of work to do. And I think we should not feel burdened by that or depressed by that. We should see that as an incredible opportunity for us to pull our weight as Americans in this generation and make sure that we leave a country that's worthy of the aspirations that our parents and grandparents had for us. And it's a worthy set of aspirations for the people that are coming after us. And if we do that, we're going to be just fine. And we're going to put this period in our history behind us. So that's a little bit of why I'm running for president. That's a little bit of who I am. And I'm happy to take questions or criticisms or observations on any topic. I'm sorry you couldn't hear me for a few minutes. You should have let me know. I always say, please ask me the questions you wouldn't ask another politician, because you might be worried that you would hurt their feelings. You cannot hurt my feelings. As I said earlier, I was an urban school superintendent for almost 5 years of my life, so my feelings have been beaten out of me a long, long time ago. Thank you for being here today, and who would like to get us started? Sir.
Senator Bennett,
Yes.
I'll try to make myself honest.
I will repeat what you say with
I
fidelity.
just have to thank you for the way you presented yourself in the first 2 debates, which is the reason that I'm here now. And I'm convinced that the argument you made, we need a nominee who can win the purple states, the swing states, in order to win this election is right on. I am so disappointed, however, that you're not getting the media coverage which you should be getting, especially after those performances. So my question is, how do you deal with that, and what is your strategy now for becoming known in the way that you have to become known?
I think for me, it's why New Hampshire is so critical. And my inclination is to spend as much time in New Hampshire as I possibly can spend here. While other candidates have been taking their stuff away, we're adding people to New Hampshire. I was looking for a vacancy in Nashua the other day, and my friend Kamala Harris had left her space, so we've taken her space, and I'm just going to do one town hall after another, answer every single question that I can, and that's not an unknown way of approaching this work in New Hampshire. I regret the debate rules. I would never have written the debate rules the way they were written. I think it rewarded a lot of the wrong things. Of course, it's self-serving of me to say that, and I'll admit that. But having said that, I think that it's, crazy that we set up a bunch of debate rules where celebrity politicians came in at 9% and dropped to 0 and are now gone, and they were qualifying for the debate stage when there were people that, have won 2 purple states and millions of votes and might have something to offer. But it wasn't up to me to write them, and it is up to me to continue to do what I'm doing. I haven't dropped out of the race because I still think I can win the race. And I do believe that the American people are where I am. I think that's where New Hampshire is. And I know it sounds presumptuous of me to say this, but let me break it down into very simple terms, which is if you approach the world the way Jeannie Shaheen and Maggie approach the world, we can win and beat Donald Trump. If we don't, we won't. It's that kind of discipline. And it's just that simple. And what happens with too many politicians today is they're chasing not even the headlines, they're chasing their Twitter feeds. And Twitter doesn't even run itself by Twitter. And we shouldn't be running the United States or the Democratic Party by Twitter. We got a good example of somebody who's been trying to run America through tweet, and that's a bad way to go. So I'm here face to face instead, and that's my strategy. Sir.
You mentioned Citizens United and the problem of money in politics. How do we go about addressing that while still preserving the freedom of news corporations to weigh in?
Well, I think the Supreme Court made a terrible decision in Citizens United. I used to say, and I am a lawyer, but I'm not going to say I'm an expert at this stuff, but I used to say that reading the Supreme Court's majority opinion in Citizens United was like reading a 7th grader's American government paper. And then I decided that was unnecessarily mean to 7th graders, so I stopped saying it. But it's true. I mean, it's just pitiful. The court took that case up on what's called a preliminary injunction. They didn't have any facts. They assumed a whole bunch of facts, including this one, which they said independent expenditures of money will not cause Americans to lose faith in the democracy because of the independence of these committees, which of course are anything but independent when your wife or husband is running it or your former staffers are running it. And they were blind to the actual corruption in Washington, D.C., which is a corruption of inaction. They imagined a world where there was a corruption of action. You give me $5,000, I write a bill for you. That's not, I mean, that happens occasionally, but rarely. But what's really happening in Washington is if somebody puts their hand up, particularly on the Republican side, and says, I want to work on climate, to use that as an example, the Koch brothers, they don't even need to spend any money. They just have to rattle the coins in their pockets and say, are you really going to do that? Because if you are, because of the Supreme Court, we can now spend $30 million, which is pocket change for us, in a primary against you to make sure that you don't come back. And that creates inaction. It's bills that aren't passed and committee hearings that aren't held. So I don't think that we're going to be threatening news organizations, but I do think what we have to do is pass a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United. And I was the second senator to sign on to Tom Udall's bill to do it. I've said if I'm elected president, I will travel to every single one of the 50 states to lead an effort to overturn Citizens United. I believe it would be an incredibly important way to mobilize the next generation of Americans, to get them involved in politics, to get the money out of our politics, and to get people back into our politics. It's not the only thing we should do. We should end political gerrymandering. I'm the guy in the Senate that has that bill. It's just like the one that Nancy Pelosi passed out of the House. I believe we should ban members of Congress from ever becoming lobbyists. I've had that bill for almost 10 years because over half the people that leave Congress and don't retire become lobbyists in Washington, D.C. And we have to do so much more to protect and enhance the right of people to vote in this democracy. If we do all of those things together, those structural things, I think, can help us reform our government without doing any harm at all to the First Amendment rights of news organizations that we have to protect. And that all might sound like hard work, or it might sound like it's beside the point, but when you think about what we have done before, when America had a Gilded Age, and I think we're living through a Gilded Age today, they changed the rules. And the progressive movement fought and amended the Constitution so women would have the right to vote. They fought and amended the Constitution so that senators could no longer bribe state legislatures to get themselves appointed to the Senate and then give themselves railroad rights of way, which is what was happening in the early 20th century. It's hard to believe, but it was. And the progressive movement changed all that. And at the same time, they began to invest in the country. They invented high school. They built more miles of railroad and of road than had ever been built before. And if they were able to do it in their time, I think we should be able to do it in ours. Yes, all the way in the back. Thank you. Yep.
What's your position on the issue of health care?
My position on the issue of health care is that we desperately need universal health care in this country, and we desperately need to reduce our costs because the American people are spending more than anybody else in the world on health care, and America is spending twice as much as any other industrialized country on the health care, and it's killing us, and we're getting a lousy result. I have believed for 10 years that the way to deal with the coverage question is to finish what we started with the Affordable Care Act and pass a public option. Mine is called Medicare X. I'm the only person in this race who's actually written that bill. Just as Bernie wrote the damn bill on Medicare for All, I wrote the damn bill on the public option. Tim Kaine is my original co-sponsor on that bill. I believe in 3 years, if you passed a public option that gave everybody in America the chance to make a decision for their family, whether they wanted private insurance, if they wanted to keep it, or if they wanted a public option, if you auto-enrolled everybody who's eligible for Medicaid and for CHIP, which is the kids' insurance program, that you could cover everyone in 3 years. I mean, I don't know why we're spending so much time in the Democratic debate talking about coverage. 85% of the people are covered. We can cover the last 15%. What's killing people in this country is the cost of health care. And that is about negotiating drug prices. I'm for that. That is about creating more transparency in all aspects of our medical system. I'm for that. That is about managing our own health care so that we deal with chronic diseases that are causing, us to spend so much more money than other places. But we're not debating any of that in the Democratic primary. I want to say clearly, I do not support Medicare for all. I think that is a bad idea. I think substantively it's a bad idea, and I think politically it is a terrible idea, and I say that as a progressive. I say that because I don't want to spend the next 10 years fighting a losing battle for Medicare for all. The kids in the Denver public schools and poor kids all over America can't afford for us to spend 10 years doing that. Let's get universal coverage done with a public option. Let's change the tax code so that we can end childhood poverty in this country. Sherrod Brown and I, he's from Ohio, you probably know him. Sherrod Brown and I have a bill called the American Family Act that would dramatically increase the child tax credit in this country. And Columbia University's looked at it, they say it would reduce childhood poverty by 40% in a year. Cut $2 a day poverty. End $2 a day poverty in America for kids. It costs 3% of Bernie and Elizabeth's Medicare for All plan. I can tell you that would make a much bigger difference to American families than what they're trying to do, and it's actually achievable.
Let's get on with dealing with climate change. We got to do that. We don't have 10 years to waste. So that's why I am where I am, and I do not believe it is the difference between who's progressive and who's moderate in this race. I think it's the difference between who's focused on the needs of actual living Americans and something else. In Bernie's case, it's because he's had this ideology for 70 years, and I admire his discipline and his commitment to his ideology. But I don't think the Democrats should be going over this cliff with him. I don't. And I'm happy to take, anybody here who disagrees with me, I'm happy to take the disagreement, and I'm happy to have a conversation about it. But that is how I feel about it. Thank you. I appreciate your question.
I think a lot of the political deadlock in this country is due to incentives to stay in office for different senators and congressmen. I just wanted to know what your opinion was on term limits for legislative branch.
Yeah, I actually don't support term limits, and the reason I don't support it is that we're living at a time when there is record turnover in the Senate. I mean, I was 99th when I got there, which was 10 years ago. I'm 41st today. We basically have no middle management left in the Senate, so all we have is people that have been there for 230 years, and then, not literally, but kind of, and you know what I mean. And collectively, it's 1 million years. And a bunch of people that have been there for a shorter period of time than I've been there and have no idea what they're doing. I mean, it took me years to figure the place out. And you may think that's because I'm an idiot. It's not. It takes a long time to figure out what the nature of the corruption is. And I think if we have term limits for senators, but not term limits for lobbyists, the lobbyists will dominate the place even more than they do already. What I would be focused on instead is the Citizens United agenda, the ending partisan gerrymandering agenda, banning members of Congress, as I said earlier, from becoming lobbyists, because that creates an incentive structure that doesn't make any sense for the American people. So those are the reforms that I would be focused on. But I appreciate that we can have a different perspective on that.
You mentioned about the tax code, and I know like Elizabeth Warren talks about the wealth tax, and someone like John Mulaney talks about just increasing, putting capital gains tax at the same level as an income tax. What is your take on all of that?
So my take on that is that I would take the rate back up, the ordinary rate back up to where it was before Trump took his taxes, had his tax cut. I would increase capital gains to ordinary income, and I would tax what are called intergenerational transfers of wealth, which are these massive estates that are built up without any tax being paid mostly, and then are being transferred to the next generation without any tax being paid. We're not supposed to have some sort of aristocracy in this country like that, and you can raise a lot of money doing that. I'm not sure Elizabeth's proposal is constitutional, and she's funded a lot of her programs with that proposal. And if it's not constitutional, then the programs won't ever happen. And I believe the American people are kind of tired of empty promises from politicians. And I think that one way of continuing to breed contempt for America, American politics, is by making empty promises that you can't fulfill. When I started running for this job, I went home to talk to my kids about it and said, should I run? It was right before, should I run? And my 15-year-old immediately said, you should run. And I was very pleased because I thought, here's somebody who really understands what a contribution I can make to the country. And like, it took 2 paragraphs to figure out that what she was actually saying was, I'm really looking forward to spending my 15th year without you in the house. And that's why you should run for president. My 20-year-old daughter, though, said to me, Dad, if you run and you tell the truth and you lose, no one can fault you for it. And I said to her, Caroline, you know what? That's good because there is no other reason for me to run and there's no other way for me to win. And so that is my view of the truth. And I will say, we all are in this incredible jam, especially the young people that are here, because of what we've done on taxes. Do you know that since 2001, we have borrowed $5 trillion from the Chinese for the privilege of giving $5 trillion worth of tax cuts, almost all of which went to the wealthiest people in America. That was our priority. We borrowed another $5.6 trillion from the Chinese to fight these 20 years worth of wars in the Middle East that have been going on the whole time these kids have been alive? That's our priority? That's 12 or 13 trillion dollars that we could have invested here at home in our economy. We could have had a set of tax policies here at home that actually rewarded work instead of rewarding capital, that made sure that work paid again in the United States of America, that you could have a living wage if you worked. That feeling that you have that our healthcare system's not as good as it should be, and that our schools aren't as good as they once were, and that our roads and bridges are kind of moldering into dust, that we don't even have the decency to maintain the assets in our infrastructure that our parents and grandparents had the decency to build for us, much less build what the next generation's going to need. That's all about that 12 or 13 trillion dollars that we borrowed from the Chinese instead of investing in America. And a lot of that was both parties. The tax cuts were mostly the Republicans. So I think we should do less of that as we think about what our tax policy is.
Yeah, I need you to tell us your 2 or 3 best ideas for preserving and healing the environment.
The political environment or the
Global environment.
our climate and
Yes,
environment.
climate.
Thank you. Did we hear the question? Yes. I want to use it I'm going to answer it this way. I hear people say all the time, and very often it's politicians, but sometimes others, who say, we need to act urgently on climate change. And I believe that. We absolutely need to act urgently on climate change. It's hard to act urgently on climate change when you have a climate denier in the White House. And it is shocking to me, and it's embarrassing to me. You don't need to be embarrassed by it. It's embarrassing to me that we lost an economic argument to Donald Trump on climate. He argued that if we deal with climate, we'll destroy our economy, whereas if we ignore climate change, that our economy is going to grow. That is a preposterous argument, yet he won on that argument. And I will tell you this, there's no way he will beat me on that argument. And maybe part of it's because I'm from Colorado, which is a complicated state from an energy perspective. But it's a state where we make the argument that we can address climate change and grow our economy at the same time. In fact, it's essential for us to address climate change for our economy to survive. That shouldn't be a complicated argument. So that's one point I want to make. The second point is acting urgently is not enough. It's not enough. These guys who should be totally, sorry to keep using you. You poor guy, you're just sitting here. Where are you from?
Right here.
Right here. All right, Chris is from right here. These guys who are furious with us, whether they know it or not, furious with us because of the $22 trillion of debt on the balance sheet, because we borrow money from China to give rich people tax cuts, because we don't invest in them, because we're not investing in our infrastructure. Or the one that is just driving them nuts is climate, because they know if we don't deal with it, they may not have the chance to deal with it because the planet might be incinerated. But you know what we got to do? It's not just acting urgently. We got to act in a way that lasts for a generation. And think about our political system today. Our political system either can accomplish nothing, or it accomplishes something where I put my stuff in for 2 years, then they rip it out. I put it in for 2 years, then they rip it out. That's what the two parties do on healthcare, on whatever else we're doing. You can't solve climate change 2 years at a time. It is impossible. To be honest about it, we need an American climate policy just like we used to have an American foreign policy, where every president who was elected, whether it was a Republican or a Democrat, knew what their job was with respect to the Soviet Union, knew what their job was in the Cold War, and with our alliances in Europe. I mean, we had differences, but in the main, we knew what we were trying to do. And we need to do that on climate, and our current our world will not sustain that, which means we got to create a new politics, doing all the stuff that you and I were talking about a few minutes ago, and putting a climate agenda in front of the American people that actually creates a coalition of people that can support enduring change. That's why my plan imagines a world where we're paying farmers and ranchers to sequester carbon in their soil. Because there are a lot of farmers and ranchers in America that are Republicans, but they've got something that they very precious that we could be using to mitigate climate change. And I think that's how we have to think about this. And when we put forward these policies, it's not about, again, who's most progressive or who's most moderate. That's not, I don't think that's the argument. It's who's putting forward an effective set of policies that's likely to gain traction and allow us to give something meaningful to these guys. One more press release on climate is not solving climate change. Putting in my well-intentioned ideas for 2 years and not having it be sustained for a generation, that's not adequate. It has the same effect as climate denial. And I think that's what Greta was talking about when she came to Capitol Hill and said, more words are not enough, good intentions are not enough. So the idea that I'd like to leave you with on here is our current political system will not succeed at doing it unless we change our politics. And by the way, one little footnote for that, a corollary to that is, our current political framework suits Mitch McConnell just fine. It's perfect for him because all he wants to do is put judges on the courts and occasionally cut taxes for rich people. He doesn't care about doing anything on climate. And for the Freedom Caucus, it's actually an ideological success for them that nobody can get anything done in Washington, D.C. Instead of batting our head continuously against that wall as we've done ineffectively for 10 years, we need to present an agenda to the American people that can overcome a broken Washington, D.C. And believe me, I'm not naive about it. I've been working with these guys for 10 years. What I'm telling you is they are not going to relent unless they are forced to relent. And the only way they're going to relent is if we overcome them politically. And if we win in these states where we've been having a hard time winning. That's my view.
Thank you.
Yes.
Hi. Met earlier.
It's nice to see you again.
I see you too. I'm a student here at New England College, and I'm going into education after this.
Thank you.
Teachers don't get paid enough.
Right.
Point blank. I want to know what your plan is to help teachers get paid enough.
My plan is to get elected president as the only school superintendent who has ever run for president in the history of America, and to get teachers paid. That's my plan. And it starts from understanding what we're dealing with, which I'm not sure that any other candidate. Can you guys hear me? Am I driving you crazy? Can you hear me? Good. Can I have a glass of water? Gracias. Thank you. You might ask yourself, why do we pay teachers what we pay? I think that's a good question. It's the hardest job that anybody could have. And I'm not pandering when I'm saying that. It's true. Especially if you're teaching in a high poverty school. It's true. So why would we pay teachers so low? And the answer to that is, we designed the whole system of how we paid teachers when we had a labor market in America that discriminated against women and said, you have only two professional choices. One is being a teacher and one is being a nurse. So how about coming and teaching Julius Caesar for 30 years of your life? And because nobody's ever going to ask you to do anything else, even though you have a million other options if you want them, we're going to pay you a ridiculously low salary that no one else in your college class would accept. And then if you stick with us all those years, we'll give you a pension that you can retire on, which sounded good in the old days because your spouse would probably die before you. And you know what? That incentive structure made sense 50 years ago or 80 years ago. It makes absolutely no sense today, but that's how we pay teachers all over America, and it's one of the reasons why we're losing 50% of the people from the profession in the first 5 years. When I was superintendent of the Denver Public Schools, DPS was basically dead last in teacher pay of any district in the metro area. But within a couple of years, we were the leading district in teacher pay. We just had a teacher strike in Denver, and that has also now put Denver at the top again. But the reality is, nobody in Denver who teaches can afford to live in the city anymore. And that's true in many places across America. And I don't think that's going to change until we pay teachers as the professionals that they are. And so, as president, what I want to do is lead a national conversation on this issue. It's very difficult because only 9% of the money for schools comes from the federal government. 91% comes from the state and local communities, and that makes it very, very challenging to talk about how we're going to actually
drag our systems into the 21st century so we can pay teachers the way they need to be paid, but we have to do it. And what we have been doing historically is just kind of hoping for the best, and that's no longer working. You know, I've got school districts all over my state where people are now, you know, where the schools are in session only 4 days a week because we can't hire teachers because we pay teachers so little. And I know very well how people feel about this in New Hampshire, which is the same. That people feel like the schools aren't as good and we're having a hard time holding on to talented people because of what we pay them. So thank you for being willing to teach. There's not a more important job than to teach.
Time for one more question. Sir.
Okay, thanks.
Mine isn't exactly a question, it's more of a invitation. So I see that your campaign is geared towards a lot of the younger generation, and you like to talk about it. We, as New England College, host a convention every 4 years, college convention, and it's held from January 5th through 9th. And it brings out over 1,000 students from all across the country to listen to all of these candidates and hear what they have to say so they can make an informed decision. And so, as New England College, we'd like to invite you to that from January 5th to 9th and to speak to these students and give them an opportunity to hear what you have to say.
Well, I'm honored that you invited me, and we'll check the schedule and we'll see whether I can come and do it. So, thank you. Is there one more? I don't want to. Is it okay if I take?
I was wondering more about what kind of policies you were thinking of implementing with climate change.
Sure. But what other policies do you think of implementing with climate change? So, much of the rest of my plan is similar to others in this race, although I will say, I believe other than Inslee, I was the first person to put out a climate change plan, and the very first plan I put out was a climate change plan, because I think that it's got to be at the top of the list of what we're trying to deal with. I mean, I know more about education, but I think this is existential for us. So $1 trillion direct investment in clean energy that would leverage another 10 trillion. I set up a green bank that can finance exports of our technology overseas so that we can win that battle as well. Cutting by half our emissions from transportation by 2030, cutting in half our emissions from the built environment, our buildings like this by 2030, net zero carbon by 2050. And a big commitment to conservation, as I said earlier, so that we can sequester the carbon in our soil. So I am very optimistic that America is going to figure out how to stand up to this challenge. The question is whether our politics are going to stand up to this challenge. And what I want to underscore there for you and for everybody else is the cheapness of a politics that's all about press releases on climate change and not actually about creating a durable result for the American people. That is not about compromising your principles, it's the opposite of that. It's about trying to deliver real change that's really going to be needed. So that's my, yes, sir.
Does that policy also include the use of advanced nuclear power?
Yes, sir.
And thorium reactors?
It does. Yep. I mean, 20% of our energy is coming from nuclear, and I think the idea that Bill Gates was having to go to China to finance his investments instead of being able to do them here in the state. That's how I feel about it. Okay, you guys have been, yes.
Oh, just one. I also came because I really appreciate.
You don't need to get
I appreciate the attention you're giving to the climate change problem. And I just wonder if there's some way to get through, whether it's fog or something in this country, to remind people that wonderful jobs and wonderful experiences can come from collectively getting together to work on the problems of climate change. And we don't hear enough about the wonderful opportunities for people of any age, especially younger people coming on, to work.
I agree with you. I
And
think
we don't hear enough
there's
about it.
limitless opportunity. This is why I'm so furious that we allowed Trump to create this masquerade, this complete fiction. It is almost like imagining a world where all America could do for the next generation of Americans was fight to make sure that wood-powered ships is what moved us around. Or that whale oil was what we were going to. I mean, when did we give up on being the country that innovates and the country that leads the world in thinking about what the next generation of jobs is going to look like. And especially, by the way, in rural areas in America where we haven't had an answer for generations about,
That's the
I
thing.
mean, people in rural America stand there and the electric lines go across, past their heads, the electrons go past their heads, and they're not the ones that are making money from that stuff. And now that we're in a place where we can deliver renewables at a low enough price and they're resilient enough, when you think about your irrigation as a farmer or a rancher, you can get it from clean energy today, and you're going to start looking at that lower price. So I'm with you 100%.
All I'm trying to say is that it's a wonderful message and it has to be even further articulated. And I think it could be as exciting as anything John Kennedy said in the
I agree.
60s. Really could.
I totally agree.
And you are our best hope for
What
this.
did she say?
Yes.
You're agreeing.
I'm agreeing that I'm a Bolshevik. No, that's a joke. I'm not agreeing. I'm not. I was agreeing that on clean energy and the new economy that we can build that can create a sustainable planet. By the way, I'm agreeing that is as exciting as anything John Kennedy ever proposed. And I agree. I would agree that it's actually more meaningful. And I would agree when you add up things like what has to be done to create resilience for the damage that's already been done, to mitigate the damage that's already been done, the millions of jobs that can be created in this country by retrofitting buildings all over the United States of America, jobs that can't be exported anywhere, many of which could be union jobs in this country, that we have an incredibly important and exciting thing ahead of us. It's hard for us to do any of that as long as we have a freaking climate denier in the White House. And it's important for us not to lose elections to people that deny that climate change is real.
But I think you got this message and it's different from all the other candidates. It just can get some volume and something behind it. It's terrific.
I'll repeat that too, just so you get that. He said I'm the only candidate that's got this message in the same way, and if I could elevate it, it would be important, and I appreciate it. I'm going to let all of you go. You got a lot, you got busy lives. I'm going to leave you with the first thought I gave you, which is please, 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 please. I mean, I'd love to have your support. I really would. I'm not high in the polls. I think New Hampshire hasn't made up its mind. I'm going to be spending a lot of time here. We'd love to have you sign up with my campaign, michaelbennett.com. We really would love it. And if you got friends and neighbors you can talk about, we would love that too. And that is why I am here. But I also will say this, no matter who you end up supporting, please recommit to getting people to vote. You got to get people to the polls, not just in New Hampshire, but all across the country. There's things that we all can do. Those of you at New England College, you can commit to making this the first place in America, the first college in America, where literally every kid, every student that has the ability to vote, votes. Think about the message you would send if 100% of the people who could vote here voted in this primary. I can tell you that people in Colorado, students there would be paying attention to what you were doing, and you would have made a really important mark in this democracy. So thanks for having me today. It's wonderful.
The preceding program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.